Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on our Tech Talk. We will be discussing OpenVPN and Tunnel VPN with our sales engineer, Eric Newvine. My name is Steve Young, and I'll be your host today. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. We are using GoToWebinar. If you have any issues with your audio, please go to the audio panel to select your preferences. If you are using a phone, you're going to need to dial in and use the access code provided. Just as a reminder, the webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to rewatch or revisit the areas that you want to follow up on. We have staff standing by answering questions, so hit that Q&A box, pretty hard. Ask all your questions, and we'll try to get to them all during the webinar. If you have any sales questions, please email them to sales@untangled.com, and we'll get back to your questions as soon as possible. And as always, Eric, you want to kick us off?
Absolutely. All right, so we're going to start with OpenVPN. OpenVPN is an SSL-based VPN protocol that supports both site-to-site and client-to-site VPN tunnels. This application is absolutely free of charge. It comes automatically included when you install the Untangle NG Firewall software on your device. So there's nothing you have to pay for as far as a subscription is concerned to use this particular application. OpenVPN in general supports pretty much all operating systems as long as they have an OpenVPN compatible VPN client. This includes mobile devices, smartphones, Mac, Linux, Windows, the whole gamut, everything here. The only thing that is important to note is when we're talking about VPN clients for OpenVPN, the only one that we provide in the Untangle software is for Windows. If you're using Mac OS, Linux, or any mobile OS, you do need to use a third-party client like TunnelBlick. That's specifically for mobile iOS and Mac OS. There are many others for Linux and Android, most of which, generally speaking, will work just fine with our OpenVPN. OpenVPN can run as a server, which means it can accept incoming remote client connections to your NG Firewall Untangle install. It can also connect as a client to other remote Untangle servers to establish a site-to-site tunnel. You can actually run OpenVPN both as a server and as a client simultaneously. This is particularly useful when you have a site-to-site tunnel at a branch office. And you have remote users that are on the road doing whatever conferences, road warriors, salesmen, that sort of thing, where they can connect into that branch office via an OpenVPN site client-to-site VPN tunnel, and then utilize that to then connect over the site-to-site to the main branch to access the things that they need. Jumping right into the configuration of the OpenVPN app, the majority of what we're setting up is done in the Servers tab. The Server tab includes all configurations for every function of OpenVPN itself. Once the server enabled checkbox is turned on, OpenVPN server will run and accepts all incoming connections from any remote client that's configured to connect to this device. The site name field is the name that's applied for this specific OpenVPN server. This is automatically generated when you install the app, but you can change the name to whatever you want. If you have multiple OpenVPNs acting as servers, just keep in mind that they do have to be unique names, because this is what's used by the VPN client to identify which Untangle server it's connecting to. Address space is how we define the IP address pool that is going to be used to assign the connections an IP address to be able to access devices and services on your local network. An important note about the address space, it does have to be a unique subnet that is not defined anywhere else on the NG firewall. So you can't put in your internal subnet, a smaller portion of that subnet into the address space for OpenVPN. It will not work. The NAT option in OpenVPN is used to NAT all traffic from a remote network to local networks to a local address. So essentially what we're saying here is automatically make sure that traffic is routed the way that it's supposed to across the VPN tunnel. It does not have to be enabled, but as a general rule of thumb, we do recommend that you keep that enabled unless you have a very specific use case not to. The site URL shows the URL that remote clients will be using to connect to this server. This can be changed under config network hostname, and you can change that to a different public IP address. If you're using a dynamic external IP, you can set up a host name. So if you're using dynamic DNS, you can specify that URL as your site URL in OpenVPN to make sure that it's always working. The username and password authentication checkbox here is used to enable two-factor authentication. OpenVPN is certificate-based, so once you enable the username and password authentication, the login, the username and password pair, becomes your second factor of authentication. This option can utilize both local directory and Active Directory for that login. Those are configured under Directory Connector. Once you've gone through the basics on the left side of the servers tab, the next thing to do is to actually come into the remote clients tab and create your clients that you'll be using, handing out to those users to connect into the VPN. When you click the add button for remote clients, you're presented with this sub window right here. The option is enabled by default. If you don't want to allow a specific client to be able to be used, you don't have to delete it. You can just disable it and it'll still be there, but it will not allow connections from that client. Client name is the description for this OpenVPN client. It identifies who the client is to the Untangle. These do all have to be unique, but the naming is fairly arbitrary. It can be a person's name. It can be, the name of another Untangle installation. It can be whatever you want, as long as it makes sense to you and your team. The group field defines which configuration set will be assigned to the client. We'll take a look at the groups in just a minute. And then the type defines what kind of client this is. There's two options. Individual client is the default, and it's intended for single remote user connections, so client to site. Network is for site-to-site VPN tunnels. When you enable the network option, you're given an additional field where you specify the subnet for the remote network that will be connecting into this device. Once that's all entered and filled in, click done, save, and then that client is available to be downloaded and used. The groups tab, which I'll show, like I said, in a few minutes in the demo, that is where you define the different configuration sets. Those configuration sets are whether or not it's going to be treated as a full tunnel mode VPN, and also gives you the option to push DNS settings over the VPN. So if you want your clients, when they connect, to use a specific DNS server, you can push that right in the client in the group options. The last field, the last tab in servers is exported networks. The exported networks is used to define what subnets can be accessed via this client. So by default, OpenVPN only enables access to the internal subnet, the subnet that's defined on your internal interface. If you have more than one non-WAN interface configured on the Untangle, and you want to give users access to that, you do need to go into exported networks and add those additional subnets in. The same thing applies to routes that you have created, VLANs, that sort of thing. All would need to be added in on our exported networks if you want users to be able to get to them. Moving on to the client tab. The client tab allows you to configure remote server connections to other OpenVPN servers, specifically other Untangle servers, as far as our configurations are concerned for this particular session. There are some ways to potentially connect to others, but that is not officially supported by Untangle. So while you might be able to get it to work, it is not something that we can help you with. The remote servers grid lists the currently active and configured remote servers that the OpenVPN is configured to connect to. Again, this is not the same as the clients in the server tab. This particular device is not acting as a server, it's acting as a client connecting to a server. Once you've connected to a remote server, you'll be able to reach their exported networks. Like I said before, as long as you have a subnet specified in exported networks on the server, the client should be able to access it. Out of the box, fresh install, there are no clients that are set to connect. A unique entry has to be created for each remote client in order for you to be able to connect to those servers. So if you have multiple servers you need to connect to, you need to import or upload a client for each of those servers to be able to connect. So you can't use one client to connect to multiple Untangles. Each one needs its own. A quick note, site-to-site connections are not full tunnel. The only way to utilize full tunnel in OpenVPN is with client to site. So even if you've selected in the group for site to site, it's still going to be not full tunnel. Internet traffic on the remote site will always exit through its own local gateway. One thing also that's worth mentioning while we're on this tab, if IPsec is also installed, you need to make sure that there are no tunnels that overlap between the applications because of how these tunnels are handled and negotiated in the Untangle appliance. IPsec, because it is a layer 3 protocol, it's going to apply at the kernel level. So it's always going to happen first, no matter what. So if you have an OpenVPN client that's connecting to the same subnet, anything that you're doing in OpenVPN will not be applied because IPsec happens first. The last tab is the Advanced tab. This tab is provided purely for advanced use only. It is intended for users who have a detailed knowledge and understanding of OpenVPN as a protocol, not just how it works in the Untangle itself. This is intended for users who need very specific configuration changes to address unusual or unique situations. You'll note at the top of that screen, there are big warnings. This is not a tab that we support. So any changes that get made here, if something goes wrong, the first thing that the support team is going to do is going to suggest switching back to your default settings or reinstalling the app if that doesn't work, because making changes in here is not something that we recommend unless you know exactly what you're doing. As this note says at the bottom, changes you make on this page can compromise the security and operation of the server. That's why we don't support them. Because if you're not doing something that you know what you're doing, you can actually cause some very serious security vulnerabilities by allowing or enabling some of these settings. OpenVPN reporting is actually fairly extensive as far as a VPN is concerned. There are a number of reports available here by default. It will provide a list of all of the events for connections handled by OpenVPN, so you can see every time that somebody has connected via OpenVPN. You can also see data transfer. That's the statistics events. It will show you all of the information for every single VPN tunnel that is configured on this device. Like all of our apps, OpenVPN's reports can be accessed via the dashboard, the reports viewer, or through the app itself. So you can add a report to your dashboard as a widget so that you can view the statistics quickly and easily. All predefined reports will be listed along with any custom reports that you've created. So if you've added additional reports here, just like with every other application, they're available for you to do what you want with them. Okay, I'm going to switch over to Tunnel VPN now. Tunnel VPN, before we dive into the settings, is intended to be used as an extension of OpenVPN. It's still using OpenVPN's technology to work. So it is also free. It is included with the install of Untangle. It is its own separate app, specifically because it has different use cases than OpenVPN itself. Those use cases include branch offices. You can send all internet-bound traffic at a remote small branch to a central site for security and filtering. This application is how you set up a full tunnel mode site-to-site tunnel over OpenVPN. This is the only way that you can set up a full tunnel site-to-site with OpenVPN. Another use case, remote security services. You can send your traffic either in total or selectively to a cloud provider. Again, it's through the use of a full tunnel mode site-to-site tunnel. And essentially what you're doing is you're dictating where that traffic goes through this application, and we'll get into that in just a minute. Another use case is SD-WAN. You can maintain connections to several cloud exit points and prioritize those tunnels any way that you want, so that, for example, if one tunnel goes down, the next available tunnel can automatically jump in and be leveraged to route that traffic to where you need it to go. So if you need to have redundancy in your tunnels, Tunnel VPN lets you do that. And then, of course, the last use case for Tunnel VPN is privacy. You can provide a safe encrypted tunnel to a location to support freer internet and supports net neutrality. This is particularly useful for home users, or for if you have an employee who's in another country where there are limitations to internet access. If they need to be able to get access back to the local office, there are vendors and providers out there, Nord comes to mind, ExpressVPN, those sorts of things that you can use to leverage to get that net neutrality that you need to be able to get back to their main office. We're going to skip the status tab in Tunnel VPN. Essentially, the status tab just shows you the current status of all of your tunnels, whether they're up, whether they're down, whether there's traffic passing, that sort of thing. The same thing is the status tab in most of our other apps. In the Tunnels tab, this is where you configure the tunnels that Tunnel VPN will use to route your traffic. There are some pre-configured VPN options that include instructions for setup. Those include Nord, ExpressVPN, and PIA, private internet access. We also have an option for Untangle. So if you are leveraging a cloud-hosted Untangle instance in, say, AWS or Azure, you can use Tunnel VPN to quickly and easily set up that VPN so that all of your traffic is routed to that cloud instance for filtering. We do also provide options for custom configurations, so you are not restricted just to the ones that we have in the list pre-configured. It will support most OpenVPN-based configuration files, and it also allows the use of zip files in some cases. If you have multiple WAN interfaces, when you're creating the tunnel, you have the option to select which interface you want the traffic to exit. So you can set up the same tunnel twice if you want to, and then just change the interface that it exits. That is technically two different tunnels, and then you have full control over routing traffic across that VPN tunnel. As we said before, multiple VPN tunnels can be configured and all running simultaneously, and Tunnel VPN can be configured to use each one uniquely or can be used for redundancy. The other part of Tunnel VPN is, as we said, setting up the rules to dictate where the traffic is going to be routed and how Tunnel VPN will control that routing. If no rules are enabled, no traffic passes over a tunnel at all, so it all exits the local gateway. Rules can be layered to utilize multiple tunnels at the same time. Using the any available tunnel option for destination tunnel will use tunnels in the order they're listed in the tunnels tab. So if you have a specific tunnel that you want traffic to go through first, but then after that it's not important, you just need to make sure in your tunnels tab that that primary tunnel is the first in the list. And then the rules will take care of the rest. As you can see, these rules can be granular. You can use tags to dictate traffic routing. You can use ports. You can also use IPs. You can use usernames. There's lots of different things that you can use in these rules to configure how traffic exits these tunnels. I'm also going to skip over the log tab for the moment and jump into the demo so that we can take a closer look at how these apps actually work. Bring up my untangle. So I'm going to go into OpenVPN. I'm going to turn it on. Again, you do have to enable the server in order for it to actually start working. Turning on the app alone does not enable server because you may not want to use the server. You may just need this for a client connection. I'm going to leave the site name alone and the address space because chances are that this is not being used anywhere else in either case. You can change this address space to whatever you want. You can use literally any IP subnet that you can think of as long as it doesn't interfere with what's already defined on the device. Before I create a client, I'm going to go in and make sure that my group is set up the way that I want it to be. You can have multiple groups configured here. For my purposes, I just need this single group. This is what they look like when you're trying to change those settings. As I said, there's two options: full tunnel or not, push DNS or not. When you're using push DNS, the default action is to push the DNS server as the OpenVPN server itself. So what it's going to do is it's going to push the untangle IP for DNS. If you want it to be something else, you change it to custom. That enables these other two fields. Then you can specify the DNS servers up to 2 that you want to be used. And if you need to, you can also push a domain if that is a requirement. I'm going to switch back to OpenVPN server for my use. I'm going to check my exported networks to make sure that my subnets are in here. There is only one defined on this device currently, and it is correct. It is the primary internal network. So now I'll go back to remote clients and add a client. I'm going to create a client for myself to connect into this VPN. So I select the default group, it's already there. I make sure that it's an individual client. If this were a site to site, like I said, you switch it to network, specify your subnet. Click Done, save. Now the only thing that you have to do, as long as you're running a Windows device, is hit Download Client, and it actually is generating these download files on the fly every time to make sure that it has the most current configuration. That's why it takes a minute for it to load like that. So I'm using a Windows computer at home, so I'm going to download the Windows setup.exe file. If I were using something other than Windows, I could use one of these other two options to download just the config files that I need to work with my third-party VPN client. This third option is also the one that you want to use for setting up a site-to-site VPN between two untangles. This is just going to have configuration files that you import as a zip file into another piece of software. The second option exports it as an OVPN. So again, depending on what you're using for a client, there's two different options here. The last option is specifically for Chromebooks. Chromebooks need a ONC file in order for it to work, so we have a separate download for that. So I go ahead and download this, save the file, and it's going to download to my computer. And let's just pretend that I am at home. I'm not on the same network as this device. And of course, I'm running Windows 10, so I have to tell it to allow. There. You're given the UAC warning about running it because it does have to run as admin. I click yes, and then the setup wizard begins. The setup wizard is very straightforward. I click next. If you want, you can read the license agreement. It confirms the version of the OpenVPN client you're about to install. In this case, it's version 2.4.7. Click agree. You can selectively install if you want to, but as a general rule, we don't recommend changing this unless you have a need to. So I'm just going to click next again. Specify where I want this to be installed. Program files OpenVPN is fine, so I'll hit install. As you see, it's installing the tab adapter automatically. Next. I don't need to see the README, so I'm going to disable that. Click finish. And that's really all that there is to installing on Windows. At that point, the user just needs to start that VPN client and hit connect. And as soon as that happens, they're connected to your untangle and the network behind it so that they can do whatever it is they need to do when they're offsite. The other aspect of Untangle OpenVPN is site-to-site. In this case, I'm actually going to treat this device as a client machine. So I'm going to import an OpenVPN file that I've already created from another Untangle instance that I have access to. So I hit upload, and on my desktop should be an OpenVPN demo. Click OK. And now that configuration has been imported into the Clients tab and into the OpenVPN app on this device. So now if I go back to Status and hit refresh, you'll see that I have a connected remote server. I gave it an arbitrary name on the other device, and I'm just utilizing that one here for the purposes of this demo. It did not connect for whatever reason. I'm assuming that is because this is behind a NATed device. This is actually running on my local network here, so I could not actually establish a connection out through the additional firewall that is in place on my network. But if that were not the case, this would have called out to the server, requested a connection, established it, and it would show connected true, and you would actually see RX and TX data passing. Because this did not connect, I only got TX data. That's OpenVPN in a nutshell. I'm going to switch over to Tunnel VPN. Turn it on. And with this one, I'm not actually going to set up any of the tunnels. I'm just going to show you what it looks like to set this up, because I don't actually have access to a useful VPN config unless I try to use that same client that I had before, which we already know won't connect. So let's do a Nord tunnel. So I come in here, I select NordVPN, and as you can see, there are all the instructions that I need right there at my fingertips, telling me exactly what I need to do to get NordVPN to connect and work through this untangle. As we said before, it does support custom zip files, custom OVPN files, as well as custom conf files. If I were to do an untangle tunnel, the steps are here. You would log into the main untangle server, basically what I had done before we started the webinar, download that, create the client, download the client, and then select the VPN config file here to upload. And then everything else would work exactly the same way. The difference being now I can leverage full tunnel mode over my site-to-site tunnel. Once the tunnels have been created, we come in and we set rules up to make sure that the tunnels are routed the way that we want them to be. We do provide a default rule to route all traffic over any available tunnel. So you don't have to create that rule if that's what you want to use, it's already there. So a rule with no conditions, any available tunnel, sends everything from your local network across any tunnel that's available. It's going to use the first one in the list of tunnels, but if there are multiple tunnels there and the first one is down, it's going to go down the list in order until it finds one that is connected. If you want to create a specific rule for specific traffic, let's say, for example, we want to route RDP traffic somewhere else. I come in here, I go to destination port, 3389. And then if I had routes listed here, or excuse me, if I had tunnels listed here, they would appear in this list automatically. So you would have any available, route normal, or route through a specific tunnel that you have configured. Route normally means don't send the traffic over any tunnel. Send that traffic out the local gateway no matter what. That is a useful override for other rules that you may have in place, so you can make exceptions. Again, any available tunnel sends it over anything that it can connect to. All right, a quick look at the reports, and then I'll actually talk a moment about the log tab. Like we said in the slides previous, there are several VPN reports available for both tunnel and OpenVPN. Both have a connection events and a statistics events. And both have summary reports as well as some nice graphical reports that are available. Again, because I don't have a VPN that's connected right now, these aren't going to have any information. But those reports are there at your fingertips to make administering these VPN connections very easy. Okay. as we talked about, OpenVPN, we already talked about all the tabs. There's not a log tab. Everything is done just in server, client, and advanced. That's it. Tunnel VPN is different because it has a log tab. The log tab is very similar to IPsec in that it's a running log of the condition of the tunnels themselves. As generally speaking, this is intended to be a troubleshooting tool, which is the main reason why there wasn't a specific slide for it, because there's really not a whole lot to use in here unless there's a problem. If there's something wrong with a tunnel where it's disconnecting randomly, or for whatever reason you've tried everything you can think of and it just simply will not connect, you can come into the log tab, you can capture that information, share it with your provider, vendor, whoever it is that you're getting that VPN client from, and then you can use that information with them to figure out what's going on. So it's just a quick, easy access way to see what is actually happening with that VPN tunnel without having to have to dig through system logs in the command line of the device. Okay. So do we have any questions that I haven't already covered at this point?
Yeah, our staff has been doing a really good job of getting to all the questions. Looks like there hasn't been anything not answered, so I think we're in good shape there.
Awesome. Okay. All right, then I will cover quickly a couple of common troubleshooting type questions that we get pretty frequently in support. And then if there are any additional questions that come up after I go through these, then we can address those before we wrap up.
Yeah, so everybody get your questions in now so that we can get to them before the end of the webinar. So
absolutely. Okay, deploying a client to a mobile device seems complicated and difficult. Why is that? Well, to put it simply and bluntly, it's because each mobile OS uses different apps. You can't get TunnelBlick for Android. It doesn't exist. And that's honestly the most direct, simple answer to that question, is because each OS uses different apps to connect with OpenVPN. Unfortunately, because of that, that means that there are also multiple applications per OS. So there's a lot of trial and error that needs to take place for some OSs. And even with tried and true applications, there are use cases where in certain versions of the OS, that app doesn't work. We do have a lot of knowledge base content about this with links and instructions for the most commonly used apps. I've mentioned TunnelBlick a number of times. Generally, that does seem to be the most common app that works with Mac and iOS. OpenVPN Connect, I believe, is the one that we tend to lean on for Android. But again, like I said, use your own judgment on those. If you want to try something different, if you find one that seems to be more secure or provides more options to do what you need it to do, try it. See if it works. An upgrade broke the client. This is fairly not common at all. We really should only see this in the event that a new version of OpenVPN server has been deployed on the NG firewall devices. When that happens, if we've changed things like the certificate encryption level, we did that a couple of major revisions ago in the Untangle. Some of you may recall that. We changed from, I'm putting myself on the spot here, but I think we changed it to a higher level of SHA encryption from a weaker protocol. When that happened, all of the clients that had already been deployed no longer worked. Unfortunately, there's not an easy way to mitigate that change. So the only option we can do at that point is redeploy those clients with the new certificates. But again, this shouldn't happen often, and it should only happen when and if we have to push a major change to the version of OpenVPN on the Untangle itself. Admin privileges on the endpoint device. Are they required? Do they need to have admin? To install the client, yes, you do need to have admin. But after the client has been installed, you no longer need to be an admin user to run the client and connect to the VPN. The only reason why you need admin is for that tap adapter step of the installation of OpenVPN. That is the network adapter that is used by Windows to actually establish the VPN connection itself. Without that, OpenVPN doesn't work. That's why you need admin. After that point, you're good to go. OpenVPN throughput. Is this possible to be measured? Sort of, but not really, is the easy answer. The bandwidth reporting relies on interface IDs to work. And since OpenVPN uses the external interface, there's not any good way to isolate OpenVPN traffic specifically to get accurate bandwidth reporting. So can it be done? Yes. Is it going to be absolutely accurate? Probably not. There are probably better tools that are available, either third party or through looking at network reporting instead on the Untangle, that might give you a better feel for that usage other than bandwidth. Why can't OpenVPN clients access the internal network? In a couple of words, because it's not an exported networks. The only networks that the VPN client can reach are those that have been defined in exported networks. If a subnet is not in exported networks, you can't get to it, no matter what. Our client requires two-factor authentication for OpenVPN. Okay, enable the username and password authentication option in the servers tab of OpenVPN, and you have your second factor. Because again, like I said, OpenVPN is certificate-based primarily. So that's the first factor, and then the second factor would be the username and password. All right. Did we get any new ones, Steve?
Oh, we got a lot of new ones.
Awesome.
We're trying to keep up with all the questions, but it looks like they're getting to all of them right now. So I don't think there's anything that is that you should go over for the webinar.
Okay.
Staff will just continue to answer questions. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover in this webinar?
I'm all set, I think.
Okay, it looks like we got through a ton of questions, so this was a really good webinar, and thank you, Eric, for good explanation.
You're welcome.
All right, so we'll hang on here for a few more minutes, for you guys to submit more questions, and we'll keep answering for a few more minutes. But as far as the webinar is concerned, we are concluded, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Hit the Q&A panel pretty hard, and we'll try to get to them really quickly. All right, guys, it looks like we got to pretty much most of the questions. If you are still needing additional help, email support@untangle.com and our support team will be able to help you with your issues. If you have any sales questions, like I said before, please email sales@untangle.com and they'll be able to help you out with any of the sales questions. Thank you guys again for joining us today, and I hope you have a great rest of your week and have a great weekend. Thank you.